Jocks sat in his living room, letting the early afternoon sun warm his shoulders. After years spent on missions in deep sectors, where the only light was the cadaverous glow of laddies and the cold rays of distant dead stars, this house on planet Solis seemed like an unreal paradise. He savored this peace, not yet knowing that this silence was just a deep breath before something was about to consume him. However, even now, something felt wrong. The beam of light streaming through the window was crystal clear, devoid of even a single speck of dust, as if the air had been filtered through a vacuum. Outside, golden fields stretched out, waving in the wind like an ocean of liquid amber. He saw his neighbor, who was mowing the lawn, with a smile and raised his hand in a friendly, carefree gesture. Jocks responded in kind, feeling the last remnants of tension finally leaving his body. Everything was in its place. The heavy oak table with deep grains, a collection of old maps on the walls, and a mug of steaming coffee. There was an absolute, blissful silence, interrupted only by the steady, soothing ticking of the clock in the hallway. However, it was precisely this silence that, after a few minutes, began to irritate him. It was too thick, as if the air in the room had solidified and turned into a kind of transparent resin. Jocks, a man trained to detect threats in a fraction of a second, felt that the atmosphere had undergone a subtle, almost chemical change. The light seemed too bright, almost artificial, as if this entire idyllic view outside the window was just a thin, painted curtain that was about to crack under the pressure of something from the outside. He set his mug down on the table. He did it very quietly, yet the sound of ceramic hitting wood was loud. The sound echoed in the room unnaturally, like a gunshot in an empty cathedral. Jocks froze, staring at the spot where he had seen the light a moment ago. He noticed something strange. Dust suddenly appeared, but it did not settle. The particles hovered in the air, forming motionless, geometric patterns, as if they were avoiding an invisible obstacle standing right in front of him. He felt a blast of icy air on the back of his neck. It did not come from the window. It was a localized strike of frost that made the hair on his forearms stand on end. Everything was about to change. He stood up, wanting to release the mounting tension that made every muscle in his body strain to the limit. When his bare foot touched the floor, he heard it for the first time. One short sound of skin hitting varnished wood. A slap. The sound came from the hallway, right next to the mirror. Jock stopped and listened, instinctively placing his hand on his hip, where he usually carried a weapon. No, he felt only the soft fabric of his lounge pants. He felt vulnerable. Nothing moved. Only the clock continued its rhythmic, but now seemingly more humid, ticking. He took another step toward the kitchen, trying to tread as lightly as he possibly could. A slap. Another footfall. This time, clearly, closer. Someone was mimicking his movements with a millisecond delay. Jocks froze, holding one leg raised in the air. A slap. The sound of an impact on the floor rang out just behind his heel, even though he remained still. He spun around abruptly, ready for a fight he did not understand. The living room was empty. The sofa stood motionless, and the curtains in the windows did not even flicker. The sun illuminated every corner, leaving no room for any shadows. That was the worst part. There was no darkness for an enemy to hide. He moved faster toward the corridor. Slap, slap, slap. The invisible pursuer also sped up. The sound of bare feet was now so close that Jocks felt vibrations. He felt the floor beneath his heels. When he reached the mirror in the hallway, he stopped abruptly. He looked at the reflection and felt sudden, sharp nausea. His eyes began to burn and water under the influence of an unnatural glow that seemed to flow from inside his own skull. In the mirror right next to his armchair stood a figure. It was tall, terrifyingly thin, and twitched unnaturally, like a damaged video recording that jumped several pixels every moment. The creature had no face, only a smooth white surface where its eyes should have been. When Jocks turned toward the actual room, he saw only the empty chair and the golden light, but in the reflection, the figure was already a meter closer. It wasn't walking. It was simply occupying subsequent points in space with every blink of his eyelids. He tried to scream, but his throat felt as if it were filled with dry sand, choking back any sound he tried to make. The fear he felt now paralyzed his nerve connections and made his breath shallow. The air around him became icy, even though the thermostat on the wall stubbornly indicated 24 degrees. Then he heard it right by his ear, the rustle of dry paper being rubbed against concrete. Not yet, Jocks. He felt a gust of air on his cheek, smelling of ozone and old, weathered copper. Someone had just leaned over him. The weight on his shoulders became unbearable. Invisible, icy hands began to push him slowly, centimeter by centimeter, down to the floor. He tried to resist, tensing muscles that once allowed him to carry heavy equipment, but now he was as helpless as a child. He saw his reflection in the mirror. The twitching figure stood exactly behind him, holding him by the shoulders. Its empty eye sockets pulsed with a darkness that seemed to draw all the light and warmth out of the room. He felt his strength fading. In the real world, he felt only a growing, steel-like pressure on his larynx. He could not utter a word. The sun outside suddenly paled, taking on a shade of dirty sulfur. The smiling people in the fields, whom he had seen through the window, stood motionless. They stopped talking. They stopped moving. All at once, they turned their heads toward his house. Their faces were devoid of any distinguishing features, blurred like indistinct photographs in the sun. They looked at him with unnatural anticipation, as if counting down to an event he could not avoid. Jocks felt himself losing consciousness, and his field of vision narrowed to a white spot in the mirror. The last thing he registered in the reflection was that the figure was beginning to merge with him. Its white, twitching skin began to penetrate through his clothes, entering straight into his pores, as if searching for a place within his own DNA. The grip suddenly released. Jocks collapsed to his knees, his hands hitting the hard floor as he gasped for air that burned his throat like acid. The figure in the mirror vanished. The room filled once again with the yellow glow of solace. Everything returned to normal. The clock ticked, the coffee steamed, and dust motes swirled chaotically once more. With trembling hands, Jocks pulled himself up. His heart hammered against his ribs like a terrified animal. He ran outside to the peephole, needing any proof that he was still a part of their world. But when he reached them, no one looked at him. The neighbors continued to smile at each other and talk about the weather as if he were a transparent ghost. He tried to speak to them, to grab their shoulders, but his hand slipped through them without any resistance, as if he were touching thick smoke. They did not hear him. For them, Jocks had ceased to exist. He returned home because he had nowhere else to go. In the hallway, he noticed a mark on the mirror, on the glass, exactly at the level of his face. There was a clear handprint. It was frost. Despite the heat outside, there was a perfectly preserved, icy shape of a hand, with 6 unnaturally long fingers. Jocks looked at his reflection. Dark, gray spots began to appear on his throat. They looked like dead pixels on a damaged screen, slowly devouring healthy tissue. This was an overriding process. The figure had not left it, had taken a place on the other side of his gaze, waiting for the Sun of Solace to set for good so it could fully take over the parameters of his existence and complete the exchange. Jocks touched the changed spot on his neck. The skin at that point no longer resembled human tissue. It was unnaturally smooth, hard as polished silicone, and radiated a heat so intense it almost burned him. He felt a rhythmic tingling underneath, as if thousands of microscopic needles were moving just below the surface, building a new structure for his body. The smell emanating from him was nauseating. Combination of heated sand and rotting copper. He sat at the oak table, staring at the maps that now seemed like mirroring stains on worthless paper. Every whisper of the wind outside sounded like an accusation, and the ticking clock counted down the time. The dark spots now pulsed in time with his heartbeat, which he could no longer calm. He felt a chill spreading through his veins, replacing his blood with something thick, foreign, and lifeless. In the hallway mirror, the reflection began to live a life of its own. The figure that had previously choked him was now simply sitting across from him, mimicking his hunched silhouette, but maintaining that terrifying white smoothness instead of a face. Jocks understood that the world he saw through the window had long since ceased to be his home. The Sun of Solace, though shining normally again, no longer brought him warmth. He was a glitch in the recording, a minor error the reality had begun to correct. There was nowhere to run, because escape required existence in time and space, and he was losing both. Every thought of the future dissolved into gray noise, and memories became foreign. In this absolute isolation, surrounded by familiar objects that had become alien masses of matter, Jocks waited for the final snap that would extinguish the light in his consciousness forever. Evening on Solis brought no relief, only lengthening shadows that belonged to no one. Jocks looked at his hands, which in the twilight began to lose their edges, blurring into the air like smoke. Beneath the skin, he saw unnatural, luminous threads moving along his tendons. Night fell, but Jocks felt no need for sleep. His body had become merely a shell, protecting a process whose finale was already decided. He watched the stars in the sky move in perfect silence, feeling that each of them now pulsed in the same alien rhythm as the spots on his neck. This was not the death he knew from soldier stories. It was the systematic liquidation of every aspect of his being. In the hallway, the mirror glowed with its own pale light. Jock stood up, walked to the glass, and pressed his hand against the icy surface, feeling his fingers slowly sink into the pain, merging with what waited on the other side. The clock in the living room suddenly accelerated, and every strike of the pendulum sounded like a hungry gulp. This was no longer time, it was a countdown, and every tick brought him closer to the moment when the mirror would become his only truth.
Earth Arc Laboratory File 12099.
The atmosphere in the laboratory is stifling and heavy. Thomas and Simon sit before the main screen, analyzing a frame from Jocks's recording the moment when the operator falls to his knees in the empty corridor. Thomas says, "Look at this. The camera does not record any figure." Jocks is fighting a vacuum, but the suit on his shoulders bends, as if someone was standing on it. Something was holding him there. Simon. Sensors show no atomic mass, only force. Simon replies, and the ice on the mirror, a surge of thermal energy in the sector, yet water crystallization on the glass. It looks like an energy drain directly from Jocks's surroundings. Aga enters the room, holding a printout of the analysis. "She is pale," Aga says. "The worst part is those changes on his neck. It's not biological tissue damage. These spots have the structure of digital noise. The source code of his body has been overwritten. She continues. His body is being replaced by an alien data stream. He isn't wounded, Thomas. He is being deleted from reality, bit by bit. Aga turns off the monitor. In the darkness of the laboratory, only the reflection of her terrified face is visible in the black screen for a moment. There is a silence, interrupted only by the hum of the fans cooling the arc servers. Aga speaks again. Record this under the entry. The waiting. In his final logs, Jocks claims he still feels that chill behind his back, even in full sunlight. I don't know if he is even in our world anymore, or if we are just watching the after images of someone who was replaced long ago. The data on the screen flickers one last time before fading into total darkness. The team remains in silence, knowing that the process they are witnessing cannot be stopped by any known human technology.
Additional stories and materials not available publicly. Buycoffee.to/butterflyproject.